Lunar Wolves, former legion of the War Master turned arch traitor Horus Lupercal, the namesake of the Horus Heresy. Raised on the depleted planet Chthoniya and trained on Holy Terror, the Lunar Wolves fought and excelled in some of the Imperium's earliest campaigns, both in the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade. After their exemplary performance in the Olympus Crusade, the Emperor officially named Horus War Master, effectively giving him control of all the armies of the Imperium, which turned out to be not such a good move. It definitely should have been sanguineous. The Lunar Wolves are also home to some of the big names in Warhammer 30k and 40k, including Ezekiel Abaddon, Tarek Torgadon, and Garviel Loken, whose name pops up in a lot of the Horus Heresy novels. The first three of the Horus Heresy novels will give you a really good background on the Lunar Wolves if you're interested in checking them out. In order, these are Horus Rising, False Gods, and Galaxy in Flames. Now this paint scheme is really quite simple. It's just white and black, or in my case dark metal, which I think looks a little more interesting than just plain old black. And I'll be taking advantage of the Citadel contrast paints, especially Apothecary white, which gives us a nice contrast with this white and takes a lot of the hard work out. And I also managed to model together some Lunar Wolves iconography using some extra bits of transfers. So let's get started. Firstly, I'm starting with a light grey primer, and this is Vallejo Surface Primer Grey, and this is going to be a really good jumping off point for any sort of white. In the footage it does look quite bright, but it is actually a really nice mid-tone. And to give us our contrast, I'm going to be using this Citadel Apothecary White contrast paint. Now you can absolutely apply these with a brush if you like, but these are a dream to work with in the airbrush. And if you do have an airbrush, I seriously recommend trying these. And I am going to go quite heavy with this just to get it into all the little nooks and crannies. And we're pretty much halfway done. The next colour we're going to be using is Vallejo Gunmetal Grey. And as you can see, I've already painted most of this model because I've got to press record. And that's why sleep is important. But it's pretty self-explanatory which places I've painted this colour. Basically around the trim on the shoulder pads, all the vents and pipes on the backpack, and the barrel and the magazine on the bolt gun, and the casing and the teeth on the chainsword. And if you like, that little band that runs around the helmet. Yeah, I think I did a pretty good job of pretending to paint those areas. And next up we're going to wash all of those areas with Nuln Oil, a mainstay in most painters' arsenal. And with just a little dab of water just to help it flow into all those little recesses and exposing these details. And I'm also going to place some of this wash into the vents and the holes on the helmet. I just wanted to make this pop a little bit more, as the helmet's usually the first thing you look at on these Space Marines. To be honest, I think it looks a little bit heavy, but there's another contrast paint called Basilicanum Grey which I really want to try for these white models. It's sort of halfway between Apothecary White and Nuln Oil. Also, while you're using this Nuln Oil, just use it to run around the edges of the parts that separate the white and the gunmetal. This just gives you a nice boundary between the two colours. And you can also go quite heavy on the metallic parts of the bolt gun. To highlight the power armour, I'm going to be starting with Ulthuan Grey. And we're not doing too many intensive highlights on this, just a few little touch-ups, starting with the crown of the helmet. And I thin this paint quite a lot so I can control how bright I get it. And then I'm just going to do a few edge highlights, starting with the centre of the helmet with this little crease in the middle. And then just brightening up these areas that we washed with the Nuln Oil before, just because they've become a little bit dull. And that includes just the little vents on the side and the edges of the helmet. And then I'm just going to use this colour to fix up any mistakes or run-offs that we made in the previous steps, which is very easy to do with white armour. And now with pure white, we're just going to do some extreme edge highlights, including all the trim around this armour. And when you end up on pure white, that's pretty much the end of the white stage. And I'm just going to pick out a few little more details that I can see, such as the fingers, the corners of the power pack, and the chainsword. There are a few areas on this white armour that I wasn't quite satisfied with the contrast with, so I used a really thin down Nuln Oil just to go around all these deep cracks. And if you're going to do this, just make sure it's super diluted, otherwise it will look terrible. Or like I mentioned before, try and get your hand on some of that Citadel contrast Basilicanum Grey. For the highlights on the metallic areas, I'm going to use my trusty Dura-Aluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour. I'm just going to run a small amount of this over the edges of the shoulder pads, the magazine and barrel of the bolt gun, and then just the metallic details on the power pack. And if you want to get really fancy, you can pick out all those little rivets around the shoulder pad, but I wasn't wearing my fancy pants this day. For the eye lenses, we just need a small dab of Blood Angels Red contrast paint, thinned down to about 50-50. And because this is already white, that's all we need to do is just drop this colour into the eye socket and it'll give us that nice contrast. For For the transfers, I managed to find a crescent moon shape from the Age of Darkness Sons of Horus transfer sheet, which I'm guessing is a nod to their Lunar Wolves lineage. And there happened to be a front-facing wolf head on one of the old Space Wolves transfers, which was perfect. Now, I only had one of these, so obviously you're not going to be able to paint a whole army like this. So it might be worth learning to freehand this, or try and find yourself some transfer paper, as it appears that Forge World no longer stock these transfers. And here I'm just using a bit of micro set just to soften the transfer so it conforms to this curved shape. And on the opposite shoulder in black paint, I'm just going to be painting the 16 in Roman numerals to denote the legion number. And when your transfers are dry, just hit them with a little bit of matte medium or varnish. To make this white armour pop, I decided to go with a Martian base, so I'm using this Martian Iron Cross texture paint from Citadel. And this is a nice rusty brown orange colour. And once that's dry, just give it a wash with some Agrax Earthshade straight out of the pot. And just to give this a bit of a highlight, we're going to be using Riser Rust, which is a really bright orange dry brush paint. And that's pretty much it for this model. All we need to do is super glue it to the base and then paint the rim. But just one more little effect, I'm going to be using this MIG Pigment Track Rust just to give it a little bit of texture around the feet. But I'd probably wait for your glue to dry before you try this. And there we have our first Lunar Wolf. Will he become a traitor or will he remain a loyalist? I guess we'll never know. You can make that decision for yourself. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you gained something useful. And stick around because we have Sons of Horus next. And if you did enjoy this video, please give us a like and subscribe. Thank you and happy painting.